Can I have a couple thumbs up or wave your hands if you can see my PowerPoint? All right, so looking good. Okay, so again, lake dynamics, and this is a picture of wave action on PResque Isle, or Lake Erie itself. So we're going to talk about Lake Erie. But first, everything we want to talk about here first comes off of this. And this is anything we want to do at the parks. This is what guides all the work we do, our mission statement. And basically what this all cuts down to is we want to conserve the natural resources for all future generations to enjoy. And a big component of that is environmental education, which is basically what myself and coworkers do. We're teachers and the park is our classroom. So you can't ask for a much better spot. All right. And then here is PResque Isle. And we have PResque Isle because of the water and wind action from Lake Erie. And we'll go through a little bit of the history, how this formed and stuff. But the lake, or the peninsula itself, is about 3,200 acres. It stretches out into Lake Erie. And we have about 7 miles of shoreline on Lake Erie side. And then we have our bay. It created a protected harbor, which has played a vital role in the history of Erie as well. The park is strongly influenced by the water levels of Lake Erie, and we'll talk about that a little more as we go, but Lake Erie has been at record highs the last 3 years, and much of the interior of the park is actually flooded. So a lot of our trails, you need at least a knee-high pair of boots to walk on to get through, or you're gonna get wet feet otherwise. Okay, Lake Erie, and I really like this map of Lake Erie. It kind of tells the story of a lot of the action that we have. You notice here, this is like a topo map of the depths of Lake Erie, bathymetry. On the red side, the far left, over by Detroit and such, that's the shallow end. That's the western basin. That's much shallower. It gets a lot warmer compared to the other parts of the lake. And then as we go to the central basin, hopefully you can see my mouse here. The central, this is, it's not a lot of change in depth. It's pretty flat for the most part. Not a lot of change in topography. PResque Isle itself is right here if you see my mouse pointer. So there's PResque Isle. And on the Canadian side is Long Point. This is their peninsula that comes out. And as we pass this little area here, this is the eastern basin. This is the deepest part of Lake Erie. It goes down to about 210 feet. And then hopefully you've had a chance to go up to Niagara Falls. All the water in Lake Erie eventually heads over Niagara Falls into Lake Ontario. So, Lake Erie, so some stats. What is cool because it's the 11th largest lake in the world by surface area, and this is freshwater. Out of the 5 Great Lakes, it's the 4th by surface area, but in volume, so how much water is in the lake itself, it is the smallest by a lot. It is the shallowest of all the Great Lakes, and I'll demonstrate that here in a moment. So again, we only go down to 210 feet. It averages about 62 feet in depth. And it is the warmest and most biologically productive of all 5 Great Lakes. My favorite stat on this is out of all 5 Great Lakes, 50% of all the fish that get caught come from Lake Erie. And the reason for that is we have good, clean, healthy water that is very rich with animals and plants that can grow there, and with the warmer temperatures, it increases their metabolism. They grow a lot faster too. So that's one really cool thing about this lake. So the depths of all the Great Lakes, they're all connected. They're not controlled by a dam or anything like that. The water just freely flows through. So we start out at Lake Superior, which is our biggest lake, goes down to over 1,300 feet in depth. That is crazy how deep that thing is. Then we go into Lake Huron in Michigan, about 750 and 920 feet for those. Then through Lake St. Clair and then into Lake Erie. So again, we're about 210 feet is our deepest spot. And then we go over Niagara Falls into Lake Ontario, which has the smallest surface area, but it goes down to over 800 feet. So it has a lot more water in it compared to our lake. It's 4 times deeper almost. After that, it goes through the St. Lawrence Seaway and out into the Atlantic Ocean. So all the lakes are connected. A couple other little fun facts about Lake Erie. It was mentioned in the original book, The Lorax, the dreary Lake Erie. Erie at one time was so polluted that there's very little life in it in the 1970s. There were rivers in Ohio that actually caught fire. They were so polluted that they would actually burn on the surface. So a lot of people took some action. In the 70s, it was a time of environmental movements to make sure we have good, clean air and water, and a lot of rules and regulations were developed, and the lake cleared up. And then people eventually contacted the writers of this and said, you know, Lake Erie isn't so dreary anymore. And the book had that line then removed out of it. And so the copies you see now aren't going to have the dreary Lake Erie in it. In the lake itself, there are more than 2,000 shipwrecks. And when we talk about the weather here in a moment, you're going to understand a little bit more why we have so many shipwrecks. And this is just the number of shipwrecks that we know of out here. They recently did a survey off of the point here at PResque Isle, and they marked 134 individual shipwrecks alone. So many of these started, the earliest known one is like in the late 1700s that we know of. The lake itself was created by the glaciers between 1 million and 12,600 years ago. So as those glaciers came down, they went back and forth and kept gouging out this basin. And as that ice retreated, we were one of the first lakes of the Great Lakes to be free of ice. We're the most southern of the lakes. The rocks that make up the Lake Erie Basin are very old. They're over 400 million years old. And they show evidence, and we're going to talk on the next slide about this, that at one time it was a tropical ocean reef environment. So this was a shallow saltwater sea many, many years ago. And if you walk on our beaches, and if you guys come up here and join us sometime, we can go and we can locate fossilized corals on our beach. Horn coral, sponge coral, stuff like that. They look like just regular rocks a lot of times, but these are actually rocks that are over 400 million years old that show what life used to be here at one time. Here's a picture of one of our buddies diving on one of the shipwrecks. You can see the prop here. This ship, I believe, is about a little over 600 feet in total length, and it is encrusted with a little critter called a zebra mussel, and we will talk about those a little more. They are an invasive species, one that we don't like. And a little bit more about Lake Erie. It has the largest sandstone quarry in the world in Amherst, Ohio. There's several salt mines that go out under Lake Erie, and they extend out like 4 or 5 miles out under Lake Erie. So it's pretty crazy. Just like they mine coal, they mine salt. And most of this is used on roadways to melt for when we have our lovely winters up here. And a lot of other minerals, sand, gypsum, limestone, very common in the area. And there's also a large natural gas reserve under Lake Erie. And one spot out here at PResque Isle, at Beach 1, if the lake is really calm, you can actually watch out over the surface. You can see bubbles coming up, and it's an actual natural gas leak that occurs out there offshore. So it's nothing massive, but it's just some little bubbling that occurs, and you can notice it on a nice calm day. Here's a picture of that salt mine out there. So again, these folks are way down in the mountain or under the lake mining this, and this is all leftovers from when we were a shallow saltwater sea. That's the reason we have so much salt mining in the region. And a little cultural, Lake Erie, or Erie got put on the map in 1812 when we were doing the French and Indian War, or War of 1812, I'm sorry. And they wanted to build a fleet to take back control of the Great Lakes from the British. And this is Oliver Hazard Perry. Daniel Dobbins picked Erie because of PResque Isle State Park here, the peninsula, created that protected harbor, and they could build their fleet in here safely and then navigate out and go and win the battle against the British in 1813. So really big history component with this that changed the course of history involving the peninsula and the lake itself. Okay, so after the quick little introduction of the lake, we're going to move into some of the components here, weather. And this is going to be the main thing that we talk about with the formation of the peninsula. So the weather here in Erie, if you don't like it, wait 5 minutes, you can see something different possibly. It can get very wavy. It can go from a flat, calm lake to about 6-foot waves in 15 minutes when the wind kicks up. and it can cause a lot of damage. This is a picture of recently the metal and rock in front there you see by the sand. That's an old seawall designed to protect the shoreline of the peninsula itself. Here is our gas dock. Several years ago, we experienced what is called a seiche. I call it the bathtub effect. I'm sure you all have taken a bath, fill the bathtub up, get in there, and when you rock back and forth, the water gets deep at one end and shallow at the other, and then the water comes back to the other side, and it kind of sloshes back and forth. Same effect here. When the wind blows really hard, pushes all that water towards Buffalo, and then it's got to come back. It's going to come back into Presque Isle Bay, and it can raise the water levels 2, 3, even 4 feet at times. The worst seiche I have experienced here lifted the ice about 4 feet up off the water, and then it froze there, and then the water went back down, and the ice was literally 4 feet off of the water floating there. So not a good time to go ice fishing then. But this can happen in an hour, and it can be gone, or it can last for a day or so. We had one this spring that lasted quite a while. Water spouts. This time of year and early in the spring, you can see these. So we go up in our tower and view them. The most I've seen at one time are 5. And basically, they are a tornado out over Lake Erie. So it's a really cool thing to check out. They usually, when they make landfall, though, they just peter out, and they don't have enough power to go any further. One did have some energy to come through the peninsula one time, but they're not very strong storms that have a lot of energy to continue on. It's something that you have to watch for when you're up here at the lake. And ice. This is something that's really important to the peninsula itself. Being the shallowest, we are one of the first to freeze up because we get colder faster. Last few years, we have not frozen, but in previous years, we were at like 90% or more ice coverage. And that's good because it protects our shorelines here at the peninsula. This is a picture of one of the Coast Guard icebreakers out there in the early spring trying to bust this ice up because they want to start shipping materials back and forth on the Great Lakes. So a lot of big ships are traveling on there at all times. And here on the peninsula, we get our famous ice dunes. These are formed by the waves that splash up on the shore, and it's so cold that the water freezes and just continues to build these mountains of ice. So just like a sand dune, we have ice dunes. It is not safe, though, to walk out onto them. They are hollow. I like to say they're like a volcano, and you can be on top and all of a sudden drop down through when it breaks, and you'll land in Lake Erie then. It's cold water, there's a current, and you're not going to climb back out with the slippery conditions inside. So do not walk out on Lake Erie on the lakeside here in the wintertime. But these protect our shorelines from the wave action and prevent erosion. The last few years, we have not had these form, at least in any length of time. We had a couple last year for about a week, I think. But without them, our shoreline is exposed to the wave action, and that's when we lose a lot of sand on our beaches and stuff. And with the elevated water levels, that's also playing an effect into it. Then here's a picture of a first attempt to build the road. The road was on the right-hand side. This is from the late 30s, early 40s. And they built this wall in front to protect it. Well, this road is no longer in existence. Parts of it are out in the lake. Other parts are buried in the dunes. It actually traveled in front of our lighthouse. So they learned a hard lesson there not to build on lakeside. Alrighty, I'm going to switch cameras now to John, and he'll introduce himself real quick then. Alrighty. And I got to share just a second. Okay, can you guys all see John now standing there? Somebody wave.
Can everybody hear me?
Okay, I can see Mr. Pete's class good. Okay, so I'm going to turn it on over to John.
Good morning, everybody. My name is John Lascos, and I work here at PResque Isle with Ray Bierbauer, and we are environmental educators who use PResque Isle as our classroom, and we teach about Mother Nature and all things associated with our park. Talking about weather today, PResque Isle is a perfect place to talk about the weather. And that's because of what the weather means to our park and the shape of our peninsula. We usually get winds coming out of the west, and that is what helps shape the peninsula. With the wind in combination with the water and the erosion, sand is picked up from the neck of the peninsula, moved along the shore, and deposited at the end of the peninsula. So the wind and the water play an important role in shaping Presque Isle State Park. And why would we want to know what the weather? Well, maybe you're planning a picnic on the beach with your family. You're going to want to know if you should bring an umbrella or wear the appropriate clothing. Usually, you'll sit down and watch the news at night, and the weatherman will tell you all about the weather. And today's weathermen have a whole kit full of high-tech tools to talk about the weather. They have radar. They have all kinds of sophisticated electronic equipment that's going to tell them about air currents and rain and snow. But not too long ago, people relied on much more primitive tools to help figure out what the weather is going to be like. Fortunately for us, we have a few of those tools here, and sometimes we use those tools when you guys come out to the park. We can use these very simple, basic tools to try and tell us what the weather is and what the weather is going to be. For example, we use a cloud chart, and this is simply a laminated photo of all different kinds of clouds and all the different conditions under which we can find these clouds. Certain clouds give us a clue as to what weather we can expect or what weather just happened. So having this in our little toolkit can be a big help trying to figure out the weather. Here's another simple but effective tool. And now this is called an anemometer. It's simply a little device that when the wind blows, it creates movement and it spins this device around. The faster it spins, this little disc will rise up the shaft and give us a reading in miles per hour, how fast the wind is blowing. So that's a good tool to help us determine how fast the wind is blowing. Of course, everybody has seen our trusty thermometer. Thermometers tell us how warm or cold it is outside, and some thermometers also give us an indication of the relative humidity, which is how much moisture is present in the air that we're breathing. We also have our very common thermometer that you can take temperatures of the water with. Just by dipping it into the water on a string, we can toss this into the lake or off a pier and get a temperature reading how warm or cold the water is. This little device is called a kestrel. And quite simply, it's a digital tool, and you hold it in the stream of air, and the wind blows through this little fan and creates a reading on the display. It will also show you how fast the wind is blowing and also tell you relative humidity. A fancy, nifty little tool to have in your weather kit. Here's an important little tool that people like to use to help with the weather. It's an emergency weather radio. And this one is powered two ways. Solar power, and it also has a built-in crank that you rotate it really fast and it creates an electrical charge to power a flashlight or the radio itself. And we can tune this to a weather station, and it will keep us informed of any incoming weather problems, such as maybe tornadoes or storm systems approaching our area. And people like to take these on camping trips to make themselves safer. You can also take them kayaking down a stream or out on the beach with us when we are doing weather-related school programming. Are there any questions so far about weather equipment or tools that I've shown you? Okay.
All right, so I'm going to switch back to my PowerPoint now. Okay, so hopefully you guys can all see that. And we'll change camera as well, so you see me. Okay. All right, so with Lake Erie, other things that we have are the environmental concerns, harmful algal blooms. So we refer to these as HAB. These are algae floats that form out in the lake, and they're caused by excess nutrients in the water. I know you guys experience them down there in Edinburgh Lake as well. Basically, they look like somebody has thrown blue-green latex paint out into the water, and it floats out there. It's not the algae that makes you sick, it's the bacteria that is associated with the algae that creates a toxin that can make us sick, upset stomach and stuff like that. But where our major concern is with this is it is deadly to dogs at very small amounts. Dogs can either get it on from licking themselves after they've gone swimming. If they drink the water, that's even going to cause a faster response. But it causes a severe reaction. Their liver will shut down. They can have nerve damage and stuff, so, and it can kill them within 24 hours. So that's one thing we're trying to educate a lot of people about are these HABs. They happen beginning of the year when we have really calm days that are really sunny. That's the most common time for them. Temperature, they don't seem to really mind as much. Like most plants, you know, once it warms up above freezing, they can start to grow and become a problem. So they've shown up here in May, and they may go into October, possibly into some of the waters. But usually your back slow waters you're going to see them. And we'll touch on these in the next few slides. So storm runoff, climate change, invasive species, erosion, and litter. Litter has been a major problem in a lot of state parks this year. Everybody's getting outdoors, trying to enjoy themselves, but they're also leaving behind many of the things they take with them. So the one thing we try to encourage is leave no trace. So pack in and pack out what you take in. So try to clean up after yourselves. We have our International Coastal Cleanup this weekend to clean up the shorelines along Lake Erie. And I know Edinburgh is one of the sites as well. You guys aren't in the Lake Erie watershed, but still a good idea to clean up all of our waterways and keep that water as clean as we can. Our runoff, and so a lot of this is from excess nitrogen that's causing the harmful algal blooms. And nitrogen can come from a host of sources: farming, lawn fertilizers, livestock, manufacturing, and all that stuff eventually runs out into the lake, and it can create excess nutrients in the water. So it promotes algae, which can take this stuff up really quickly, and it's just going to go crazy. And then as the algae gets thick, it can actually start dying because it's blocking the light from other plants below and the algae below itself, and create what are known as dead zones. There won't be any oxygen in the water. And as our fish swim through it, they all of a sudden enter an area, there's no oxygen to breathe, and they end up dying, adding more nutrients to the water. So it can have a compound effect. We have not experienced a fish kill here in Erie, at least here at PResque Isle, in quite a few years. I remember times when it was really bad, but lately it's been nice. We haven't had that. You got natural die-offs occasionally during when the spawning season and stuff, but this year and the last couple of years have been great. The sun, this is the source of all energy on our planet. And the problem with this is all the greenhouse gases that we have now created, and it's trapping a lot more of that energy in here, and it's causing things to warm up quite a bit. It hasn't been official yet, but July and August were about 3 degrees above our average this summer. We didn't have a lot of those really hot days, but the nights never really cooled down either. So we were up into the 70s and then right back up into the 80s, mid 80s, high 80s all the time this summer, it seems like. So that's going to have an effect on our water temperatures too. And some of the global data that they're collecting right now has shown, since the Industrial Revolution, a steady climb in our temperatures. And we're getting higher and higher over time. And just a few degrees can really have a drastic effect over time. Erosion, we talked about this with the elevated lake levels and such. This is a road that they built out on lakeside by Beach 7. And it lasted, I think, 2.5 years. And this year it got destroyed. There used to be about 50 yards of sand and beach out in front of this area. That got all washed away this winter, and we actually documented this falling apart as the waves came in and just ate away underneath this roadway, and the road then, most of it collapsed in. But I went out yesterday, and this is the area now. So they put in new sand, the sand replenishment, packed it back under the roadway and stuff like that. So hopefully, you know, this will help protect that shoreline. But with the elevated lake levels and no ice, it's really making it a challenge. And then the last thing here that I'm going to touch on is water quality. So this is, you know, all the parameters of your water. The temperature, again, you know, with the warmer conditions we're having, the lake water is getting warmer. Some fish don't like that. Some love it. Fish like trout, they like cold water. Bluegill, they love it warm. They can handle it anything. Water clarity, how can we see through that water? You know, all the different sediments that might be washed into it and stuff. We don't want that kind of stuff in there. We want to be able to see through it. pH, John's going to talk about that here in a moment. And then we have dissolved oxygen. This is how much oxygen gas is in the water itself. And this is what fish use their gills for, to collect, to breathe underwater. And areas that are stagnant or get really warm have less oxygen in them. So certain fish will not survive there, while other ones can thrive. Some other parameters that we take a look at is alkalinity. This affects the stability of your water to change in pH. Ammonia, nitrate, and nitrite, these are like your fertilizers. So ammonia can be toxic to fish in high concentrations. Nitrate and then nitrite are your fertilizers, and this is what the plants can then absorb and grow with. So your algae, for example, and a lot of that comes from decaying matter, as well as your fertilizers that you may put on your yards or fields. Okay, so we are going to cut to John now, and he's going to demonstrate a pH test. Just a moment. Okay, you guys should be able to see John hands there working with the pH. Thumbs up. Mr. Pete's class, I can see you guys the best. Okay, thank you guys.
Hopefully everybody can still hear me. We can do several different types of water quality testing. Probably the easiest test to do would be a test for pH. And if you haven't heard of the term pH before, pH stands for the potential of hydrogen. It's a measure of how many hydrogen atoms are in a substance. Too many hydrogen atoms, and you'll have a substance that is alkaline. The fewer hydrogen atoms, you'll have an acid. So the scale runs from 0 all the way up to 14. 7 would be the neutral number. This is an area of the spectrum that we prefer our nice, clean drinking water to be. Drinking water for us human beings can be anywhere from 7 to a very weak 9 or 10, but we prefer 7 being neutral. And to sample our water, we have taken beforehand, we got a sample of our water in this little jar. I poured 5 milliliters, which is what the test kit calls for, into this little test tube. And we will add 12 drops of indicator solution into the sample. So we'll count them off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 drops of solution into the sample. We will put the cap on, mix it, back and forth gently. And what we're looking for is a change of color. Green means that the sample is pretty close to neutral. If it were to turn blue, that would mean that we have an alkaline substance. If it turned red, that would mean we have an acidic substance, which would not be good for the fish. So we're going to take our test tube and drop it into the top of our viewer and compare the sample color with the colors on the slide and match them up as best that we can. And it looks like we're going to get somewhere in between here. So I'll turn it around and look on the front, and that's about a pH of 7. So that means our water is basically neutral, which is very healthy water for humans and fish. So we're happy with that sample. Thanks a lot.
Okay, go back to PowerPoint, gang. Okay, make sure. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the fun stuff that we like talking about, the flora and fauna, plants and animals. Here at Presque Isle State Park, we have an abundance of wildlife out here. About 40 different species of mammals make their home out here, thousands of insects, over 700 species of plants. Many of them are rare and endangered. They're only found here at Presque Isle because, let's face it, Pennsylvania doesn't have a lot of beachfront property available out here. So we have the shoreline up here in Erie County. You're going to have unique plants that like those types of habitats. So lots of cool animals that live here. Birds, there's over 300 species of birds that can be seen throughout here in the given time. And then amphibians and reptiles, you know, few of those, not a lot of like salamander stuff on Presque Isle, but we do have frogs, and then we got all kinds of turtles and a few snakes. And then when you get into fish, we'll talk about that a little later. A little over 100 species of fish are recognized as native species here. Not ready for those. A couple native animals, so probably like 3. Okay, I'm going to switch the camera back over to John again. He's going to show you a few of our critters that we have. And you should be able to see John now. Mr. Peach Class, can I see a thumbs up if you see John? All righty, thank you guys.
All right, hopefully everybody can recognize what I have in my hand here. This is one of the most common animals that we have on the park, probably because we have a lot of water on the park. We're surrounded by a lake and a bay. And one of the most common visitors we have here would be this duck. This is a male mallard. Notice the beautiful colors on his head and the beautiful colors on his wings. Really pretty bird. Common visitor at Presque Isle State Park.
With the lake, we have 2 different types of ducks here. The puddle ducks, which is what the mallards are. They'll be seen in the waters swimming. And then we have diving ducks, which actually have feet further back, and they'll dive down into the water after fish. And they'll start migrating here very shortly.
This is another common visitor at Presque Isle State Park. We'll see this guy circling the water, hovering, looking for a fish, and then he'll dive down and get that fish with his very sharp talons. This is a raptor, or a bird of prey, and this is called an osprey. Ospreys are also called fish eagles. And they don't eat just fish, they will take other animals like snakes or even squirrels maybe if they can't find any fish. But recently at Presque Isle, we were very happy to find out for the first time in the history of Presque Isle, ospreys have finally nested successfully on the park. So everybody here was very excited to see that. They raised their chicks, they did very well, and hopefully they'll be back next year. So here is the osprey.
Good? Okay. All right, we're gonna go to back to my show here. Click, click. Alrighty, so those animals, like John mentioned, the osprey, it doesn't eat just fish all the time, but if we have a food chain, so if you remember, all of our energy comes from the sun. Plants are the only thing that can really absorb all that energy. And then something has to eat those plants. It can be anything, insects, herbivores, fish, whatever, and it's gonna work its way on up. But if you just have a food chain and say that mouse were to disappear, both the snake and the osprey would end up dying as well, because that's all they ate were each other. But most animals don't have just one food item that they're going to focus on. They have several, because seasons change, different foods are available at certain times. So you got to have a varied diet, and we create what is called a food web. And here in Lake Erie, there is a massive food web with all the different animals that you're going to see around, all the way from the little guys up to some of the bigger critters that we have. So next thing we're going to show you guys is our macroinvertebrates. This is one of our favorite things to do, is to take a sample of the water. Mainly we're looking in the plant material that is on the bottom of the lake or floating there, stuff on the inlets and the bays, ponds, stuff like that. And we clean it out, and then we find little bugs that are crawling around in there. And a macroinvertebrate is a critter that is big enough for us to see with our naked eye, and they are an invertebrate, so they do not have a backbone. Basically, they have their skeleton on the outside of the bodies. A lot of these guys are a little squishy too, so you got to be careful how you handle them so you don't hurt them. But they play an important role in that they're in the bottom of the food chain for the most part. Many of them are predators of each other, but fish eat these guys. Some birds will consume them as well. So I'm going to cut now to John, and we're going to show you some of these guys in our sample that we collected. And the thing about this time of year is in the fall, they tend to be smaller because a lot of their eggs were laid during the summer. They hatched. These guys, it's a little more difficult to find them. I was able to get a few little ones out, but in the spring is when they're bigger and they're ready to become adults. So it's a lot easier to see these guys. So, all right, John, it's all you.
All right. What we have here is a little sample of pond water. And when you guys come out to the park, you would work as a team. And you would go down to the pond's edge, take some water from the pond, and scoop up some plant vegetation, whatever kind of plants are growing in the water at the water's edge. A lot of times these creatures are hiding in the plant vegetation. So we'll put some of that vegetation in this bucket. We get the material and we shake it out, and we move that aside. And if we're lucky, we wind up finding creatures that live in that water. Like, yeah, right here.
There we go.
Yep, this is a dragonfly nymph. You can see it right there in the corner of my little jar. These creatures can spend up to about 5 years underwater before they emerge and then become adult dragonflies, and depending on the species, maybe only live up to about 2 weeks. And that's their life cycle.
Those guys are a top predator in the water, so they eat. If you look at the top picture there, there's an example of their jaw. It looks like our arms are bent, and they'll reach out, grab it, and pull it in. So they eat a lot of stuff that they can catch. When we collect them and have other insects in with them, sometimes they eat them while they're hanging out in those little containers together. So that's our dragonfly.
Another one of the creatures that we can find is this guy here.
So this is a damselfly. Very similar to the dragonfly. Has the 3 little tails at the end, but those may disappear if a critter tries to eat them and they lose them. And they got that football-shaped like head. That's one easy way to tell them. When they hatch, they look like a dragonfly, but much smaller. And their wings, they're able to fold them up over their back. A dragonfly's wings stick out over its side all the time. But these guys come in a lot of cool colors and stuff. And we did find a couple of those. All right, this is a scud or side swimmer. So they look like a shrimp. They literally lay on their side just like that picture, and they doggy paddle back and forth. And you can have these in an aquarium at home and raise them. They're good food for a lot of the little fish. They don't get very big. Every one of you guys, I hope, have gone out into the woods and turned over a log or picked up a rock and found pill bugs underneath there. This is the aquatic version of a pill bug, the aquatic sow bug. So these guys are detrivores. They eat rotting materials, so leaves and stuff like that. So they're found in amongst the leaves eating that kind of stuff. They're shredders like. That's their main food source. They can get decent size. And my personal favorite is the water scorpion. So if you look at this guy, he's got that little arms up here, this tube at the end of his tail, that's his tail. He actually sticks that up out of the water and he can breathe through that. And then on his head, he's got a sharp, pointy, needle-like structure. When he catches his prey, it may be a little fish, it could be another macroinvertebrate, he'll stick that into him and suck the insides out of the animals. That's how they eat. But these guys are pretty cool ones that we find. And then the last one is a water mite. In our sample, you can't see them because these are about the smallest macros you're going to have that you can see with your naked eye. They look like little spider dots swimming through the water. They come in real bright green color, like my mask, or a red coloration they can be as well. And there's all kinds of little mites and stuff. I know on like sidewalks at our house, we get these real bright orange ones that, you know, obviously they're not aquatic, but different types of mites. They look like they're in the arachnid family. Another important source of food for all the tiny fish. All right, we're gonna move on here to my next thing because, of course, I'm running out of time. Okay, fish next. So this is a little chart here of all the different macros that we could find in our ponds. And over the years, I have found almost everything on this list at one time or another. This is called a Dichomous Key. This is something that we use to identify critters. You ask a question and answer it with a yes or no, and it's going to guide you down through where to go. So at the very top, it's going to ask, does it have a shell or no shell? If it has a shell, we're going to stay on the left side and figure out whether it's like a clam, a mussel, or some type of snail. If it has no shell, we're going to move over to the other side. Does it have legs? Is it worm-like? Does it have tentacles and stuff like that? So a variety of different things might be on there that we need to figure out what it is. But a lot of these are water quality indicators as well. Some of them, if you have good clean water, you're going to find them in abundance. If you're not finding them, but you're finding some of the others, such as leeches and a lot of worms, you have some pretty poor water quality there. So it's another indicator of what we can find. And when we do our pond studies, we find a variety of these guys in various numbers. So it's a good indication that we have pretty good water now in the area. Invasive species, I'm going to touch on this. These are critters that, don't worry about it. These are critters that we don't want in the area. They can be a bacteria, they can be a plant, fish, mussel, insect. It can be anything that doesn't belong here. And it could come from as far away as the other side of the world, or it can come from another watershed, so just over the mountain, say. So it's just an animal that shows up in an area where it originally was not at, and it can have a catastrophic effect on the environment because it has no predators, and it could just take over. So we have our zebra mussels in the top left there. They showed up in the late 80s, and just their population ballooned. They can, female of those can have over 1 million babies at a time, and they grow really quick. But what's good, they filtered the water. They actually helped clean up Lake Erie. So that's one positive from them. But they also choked out a lot of our native species by stacking on top of each other. They cling to any surface they can. So they piled up on our native mussels, and they couldn't filter feed them because they got to open up, and then they starved. So we saw a decline in our native mussels due to these. Another critter that came from there is the round goby, top right. Same area, the gobies actually eat the zebra mussels, but these little guys get about 6 inches long and are very voracious eaters. They go into the nests of our native fish, eat the eggs, eat the babies, anything like that. But our native fish are now starting to recognize these as bait or food, and you know they're starting to get a little more in check. Bottom left, we have a piece of Phragmites, common reed grass. this grows in abundance and just creates a monoculture. And we had a lot of this at PResque Isle, but we've been working really hard the last few years to push this back, and it's allowing our native species to grow now. This will choke out all the native species and doesn't allow them to grow. And what we want here is a burr reed edge within the park itself. That's what's dominant around Lake Erie. Looks like a cattail in a way. And that plant doesn't compete well with the Phragmites. And then we have another fish, the rudd. Showed up, real bright red fins and stuff. We actually have one of these in our aquarium here. So, okay, lastly, we're going to talk about my favorite, our fish. So fish are cold-blooded. So whatever the temperature of the water is, they're going to be. When we were talking earlier about Lake Erie being warmer, they're going to be warmer fish then. So they all live underwater for the most part. There's a few oddities that can come out, but all of our fish here have a bony backbone for the most part, but there's also your chondrichthyes, which are your sharks, skates, rays, things like that. They all have fins, various places on their bodies, and they have gills to breathe. So they've been evolving for over 500 million years. Temperatures, again, they can vary from below freezing to over 104 degrees. Some fish can live in. Not everybody can. pH values, like John was talking about, some can be in pHs of 4. I actually keep some aquarium fish that like it about 5. That's really, really acidic. They're from like the Amazon area. Then others can handle up to 10. So it's a real alkaline area. So, but they're very specialized. A lot of these fish can't be taken to various other places. They won't survive because they're so adapted to those conditions. Dissolved oxygen, some could have no oxygen in the water because they're able to gulp air from the atmosphere and breathe that way, or to completely saturate. So we're talking like in a waterfall location. Salinity, 0 to 90 parts per thousand. So it can be like no salt to really, really, really salty. Depth, 0 to 7,000 meters. And if we'd go down to 7,000 meters, we'd be dead, we'd blow up. These fish are able to handle these conditions, but when they're brought up to the surface, they get deformed because they're so used to those heavy pressures at the bottom of the oceans. When they come up, they don't look the same, and it's not good for them a lot of times. Lots of fish, almost 34,000 fish in 18 were described. In North America, we have about 1,200. And in Pennsylvania, we're a little over 108 so native species that we have here. So I'm going to cut the camera over to John. And we were able to capture a few native fish that live here in Erie. So the first one, is that our pumpkin seed?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's upside down.
No, you're good. So this is our pumpkin seed. So it's a little guy where John's hand is. There'll be a little orange patch underneath his thumb if we could share that. And then it's got that real bright yellow belly. Whoop. So these are also known as sunnies. They're in the sunfish family, which is a family of fish, but a lot of people call the pumpkin seed the sunfish because it has that real bright yellow belly. Down south, they're actually known as shell crackers because they eat a lot of mussels and snails, and they consume. If you can slide your thumb back a little bit so we can see that orange patch. There we go. So there's that little orange patch. That's the key identification on a pumpkin seed, a little orange spot. Okay, next one. He's not wanting to agree that much. So a little bluegill now. Yep, or no, this is our rock bass, I'm sorry. So this is a rock bass, another real common fish in amongst the rocks. It's got that real bright red eye, and they got this kind of forest green tan coloration to them. A real common fish along the shoreline here in Lake Erie. So, and this is a member of the sunfish family too, so it's a bass. So, all right. And then our next, here's our, if you guys have gone fishing, probably the first fish you ever caught was a bluegill. Again, this is a young one, so once they get older, they're going to develop that blue on their gill plate. These are really good for ice fishing when you capture them. I know down at Edinburgh Lake, you guys got a lot of them in there along the shoreline. You can go check out, see swimming in there. They're not going to get real big, but they're fun fish to catch, a good one to consume as well because they grow so fast, so they're not in the they don't consume a lot of the toxins over time that build up in their tissues. Is he under the filter? Yep. So John's going to try to catch our last one here that's in our tank that we have. So we went out and used a technique called seining where we had a 20-foot net and we just walked through the water and it was floating at the surface and bottom. So there's our yellow perch. Lake Erie is known for these guys. They get about 14 inches long as a big one, but you can go anywhere in Lake Erie and find a Lake Erie's perch sandwich. So they're really known for that. So great little predator fish, related to the walleye as well. All righty. So with that, I think we're going to shift back here. Okay. And go to my camera. With that, guys, I am done. So I'm going to try to get back to my screen here. And if you have any questions, let me know.